everybody, and welcome back. I hope you really enjoyed those presentations. I know there's a lot of content in it, and it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, but don't worry, because absolutely everything is being recorded, so you can go back and enjoy it again and have a muse and send in questions after the conference as well, because there's a lot of information there. But I hope you really, really enjoyed it. So we've had some questions coming through, some fantastic ones. I'll try and group them and try and bring the best out of the panel. As I said before, any questions that we haven't managed to answer live will be answered, and they'll be put on our website and in the conference proceedings as well. So we will get round to everybody. So there's been some fantastic questions. So, excuse me, I shall start pushing them. Okay, so we've heard a lot about trees, and there's been a few questions regarding the capacity for tree planting. So let's start with you, Jeremy, because yours was about tree planting and trees. Do we have the capacity in the Tees Valley to plant many more trees?
Well, we do. I'm sure we have. Actually, we've got very low woodland cover across much of Tees Valley, and more trees would be a good thing. It's all about whether we can plant trees on that land. What we don't want to be doing is trying to do it too cheaply and pushing the trees onto the marginal sites, which are very often of interest for other things, for wildflowers or for brownfield sites or whatever. So we've got to find the financial mechanisms that allow us to plant new woodlands as soon as possible. I would say in the very short term, let's plant hedgerows. There are a lot of areas around, particularly around the north side of the Tees Valley, where hedgerows have been grubbed out over the last 40, 50 years. We could make a start almost straight away planting hedgerows. I think one thing I didn't pick up on well, I tried to get across in my presentation was about the whole carbon costs of habitat management and tree planting. And I think one of the things I didn't really cover was actually the demand for trees, and the fact that last time we had a big demand for trees, we were importing ash trees from the continent, and we brought a load of ash dieback with it. So one of the things we'd like to do at the Wildlife Trust is actually get people growing trees locally, so that we can start to build up almost like a dispersed network of community tree nurseries of local stock. Because if we're going to have this demand for trees, we've actually got to look at the whole carbon cost of this and not just think, well, let's splash a load of money on foreign trees. Nothing wrong with foreign trees necessarily, but it's that huge economic, sort of almost industrial supply chain that we're then going to contribute to, which has a carbon cost in itself. So yes, the answer is there is space. Let's start with hedgerows, then look at the proper cost of planting woodlands and maintaining woodlands for the long term. Let's get underway very quickly, growing our own trees as well.
Thank you, Jeremy. Yes, and actually there was a fantastic conference by the Ecosystem Knowledge Network earlier this year, a national one on accelerating woodland creation. So if you want to know more about all the opportunities and the constraints, that's a really, really good one to go to, their resource. So that's the sort of the lowlands. Chris, have you got anything to add about trees from an upland perspective?
I think the notion of getting the right tree in the right place is really, really important. And we could create a habitat, we could look at a habitat map of somewhere like the North Pennines and all the priority habitat. You might think, well, that's not where I'd put trees, but actually a lot of the areas outside a priority habitat mapping exercise would still produce lots of white moorland, for instance, which is really, really important for wading birds. So it's not really, really simple, but we do need, and I think, Adam would back us up on this, we need some mapping that gives us a really good steer as to where the best places for trees might be from a biodiversity perspective, the best places for productive woodland, that allow us at least to be the first places where we go and have a look, and that rule out some places too. One thing I would just quickly add is that tree planting seems to be getting a bad name at the moment. Whenever anybody talks about tree planting on Twitter, people come along and say, oh, natural regeneration is how it should be done. Yes, where you've got a seed source. It'll be a menu of approaches that delivers a landscape richer in trees in the right places. And tree planting is not all great, and it's certainly not all bad.
Thank you, Chris. I'm glad you picked that up about rewilding, because that's one of the questions about what the scope for rewilding. I think I'll bring back Jeremy here as well, because we've been doing nature recovery in the Tees Valley for quite a number of years already, haven't we, on some of our brownfield sites. Can you give a couple of examples?
Well, we have a couple of nature reserves. Maze Park's one of them, very much a brownfield site, old industrial site. But then also, I think one of the things we've managed to do here is plant up on some old farmland sites as well. And I think I showed a picture in our presentation of the land at Bowesfield and Preston Farm, where we've put really significant areas of new planting, actually on land that was arable. And I think that's one of the real cost benefits in terms of carbon, where you're taking land out of intensive production and trying to move that across into long-term carbon storage.
Great, thank you. And I'm glad you've mentioned farmland there, actually, because obviously we're aware if we want to expand our natural habitats, maybe we need to expand them into farmland areas. And actually what we found from our carbon account that was commissioned this year that Geraldine mentioned in her presentation is actually 54% of the Tees Valley is actually farmed. And at the moment, it's sort of emitting carbon from rather than absorbing it all. I mean, it's all sort of balanced out by other habitats. So we clearly need to work with farmers. So I'm going to put this to Chris. I will get to you, Adam and Louise. I haven't forgotten about you, don't worry. But Chris, clearly the AONB does a lot of work with farmers. What can we learn in the lowlands that will help the conversation, the dialogue, to get these regeneration, nature recovery programs going here?
I think it's about listening to the farming community. We spent with the Tees Swale programme that we presented on earlier, that was an 18-month process in development of just listening to farmers and what it is that they can achieve on their land. And if you give them that time, we were able to come up with loads of things that farmers wanted to do that had genuine benefit for biodiversity. But it takes money. It takes, people cost money. And if you're going to do that, have that investment in engaging with the farming community, it's going to have to be resourced from somewhere. But listening to farmers is the way to begin that process. We really want to increase farmers' ambition as well. We really want to be able to get them to think bigger about what it is that they can do. And to do that, I think we have to challenge our own ambition as well. We have to be more ambitious about what we can achieve working with our farming community. So investing the time and the money in the listening and the developing things slowly together, one-to-one, is really important. And peer-to-peer learning, bringing farmers together in clusters, is happening all over the country. It's not new. But that peer-to-peer learning, farmers are often going to take far more from their neighbour than they are from someone who comes from an agency or a wildlife trust or wherever else. So listen, bring people together, increase the scale of our ambition. So a lot of the things we've been doing in Tees Swale and our other work, you can do on one farm and we can all do that, but can we scale it up to 20 or 50, or in our case, 300 across a landscape?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And that actually brings me on to a question, probably to Adam here. So we started talking about mechanisms to make these changes, and of course that's what your presentation was about. And we've seen so much effort in the past, haven't we? From all the different agencies, from volunteers, I mean, it's not like we've just suddenly started to preserve nature and recover it. What's the difference these new mechanisms are going to make? So will it really make the changes that are actually needed this time?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that's something we've been very aware of in developing local nature recovery strategies, is the amount of work that's gone before and where things have worked and where things haven't worked as well. One of the big lessons we've learned is giving the sort of nature recovery strategies, so to sort of trace history back through biodiversity action plans and other things, is giving them the statutory clout, for one. So that's sort of part of what we're achieving through the Environment Bill, and connecting them up with funding mechanisms. So biodiversity net gain funding, another part of the Environment Bill, and ELM, so that's environmental land management, so payments out to land managers for how they manage their land, and just sort of directing these various mechanisms alongside things like Nature for Climate through LNRSs gives them the sort of the backing and gives an incentive to land managers and to ENGOs and other organizations in an area to to take part in the process and to have a real say about what the outcomes are, be they tree planting or rewilding or any of the things that we've mentioned so far. Another thing is just sort of joining up the geography of local nature recovery strategies with the decision makers. So that's something that we've seen through various initiatives, is that it's difficult to influence decision makers, for example, local authorities in the planning system, if the strategy or plan is working to a different scale. So that's something that's why we've decided to go with the local authority boundaries as the sort of base unit for LNRSs, because those are that's where a lot of decisions affecting the environment are made through planning, through sort of Section 106 biodiversity net gain funding, and that's why we've targeted through there. So that's sort of the three main ways, really, is aligning with the funding, aligning with the decision makers, and giving them the statutory clout. And through the Environment Bill, we've increased that statutory clout by giving all public bodies a duty to report on what they've done in regards to the LNRS, how they've helped deliver it.
So sort of expanding that, one of the questions has been, and of course in the Tees Valley, we're very, very lucky because we've got lots of overlapping geographies. So our local enterprise partnership, the combined authority, which is the 5 local authorities in the Tees Valley, and the nature partnership all share the same boundaries. So fingers crossed, it should really help this process. So with that in mind, we've got a question here about the time. When will these areas be confirmed? Will that be done top down or bottom up? So who's going to decide on these areas, and when are they likely to be confirmed?
Yeah, it's another good question. And as you said, Tees Valley is very well placed in terms of sort of coterminous geography already. The process itself hasn't been set out yet, and the timings on it are very much dependent on Environment Bill passage, which, as we've seen with the Environment Bill so far, is never set in stone. Been introduced a few times and paused and everything. But so we're looking to Royal Assent next year, and once we've got that, we'll be developing secondary legislation to help support it. So that's some regulations and statutory guidance, sorry, to sort of set out the process in a bit more detail. So then after that, that's when we're looking at appointing responsible authorities. And in order to appoint responsible authorities, you have to decide on what geography you have, because there'll be no gaps and no overlaps in LNRSs, unlike previous initiatives. So it's important to decide what the entire map of England looks like before you appoint anyone as responsible authority to achieve that, especially with having no gaps. And on the point of whether it's top down or bottom up, we'll be working closely with our arm's length bodies, particularly Natural England, to help deliver this, and just building on local intelligence. So it will be through discussions with DEFRA rather than DEFRA imposing this. I think that's something we've learned through the LEP process that MHCLG and Bays ran. It didn't work very well because someone in Whitehall sort of, I mean, not to be too disparaging of colleagues in central government, but someone in Whitehall sat with a map and drew lines on it, and it didn't work very well with local administrative boundaries. And we're seeing with a lot of local industrial strategies that combined authorities are taking those over where in some areas. So we're learning lessons from that, in that it does have to be very much based on local circumstances, particularly if we're asking local authorities to lead.
Great, thank you, Adam. And of course, the Nature Partnership here will be working very closely with this and letting everybody know, keeping up to date on the progress and what's happening, and who's going to be the body who takes it on, the responsible body. So it's all evolving, and we'll let everybody know as we go along. So I'm going to move on, and we've got quite a lot of Teesside University students with us today, hopefully, out there. Hello. And we've had a few questions submitted from them. And I'm actually going to ask Louise this, because we had a really active discussion whilst the presentations are playing about the job market, so in our sector. So we're seeing lots of initiatives come up, lots of changes. We're starting to finally respond to the climate and biological crisis. Is that going to translate into more jobs, particularly for graduates in the future?
It's a difficult question to answer, and where it's as much guesswork as evidence-based at the moment? I think the answer is yes, but it might not always be where you're looking for it, because there are a number of changes happening around the same time. You're having scaling up in some parts of the sector, scaling down in others, which might move the burden of work and therefore the job opportunities away from some aspects of consultancy, but hopefully towards some aspects such as habitat creation. But whether how resilient these are in the long term, how they are with regard to short-term basis, is, I think, something still yet to be determined. So one of the parts of the discussion we were having earlier was the balance of, with these opportunities of funding coming in to the nature recovery network and the habitat restoration targets of 500,000 hectares, and what could be delivered through biodiversity net gain and the funding from development for that, is that going to be a lot of capital habitat creation, and that's going to need people to be involved with that. But where there is funding put in place for the long-term projects, where you've got 30 years worth of habitat management, where those projects scale up on a national level to meet 10% net gain from development across the whole country, there is going to have to be some scale up in staffing to help manage that. Some of it will be delivered by farmers, but they might not have either the capabilities or just the capacity to do all of those changes in habitat compared to how they manage their land at the moment. So there will be opportunities and job creation through that, and some of that will be more stable because it'll be from job opportunities generated from 30-year management plans, but others might be more short-term conservation projects or changes in how all of these strategies are developed. The work that goes into preparing national nature strategies will filter down to work required right at the ground level, to just collecting that data on habitats and species. I know there are local authorities across and biological record centres across the country who are trying to scale up some of the work they're doing in understanding their local areas. So yeah, there are opportunities there. Where they will quite end up and where you students end up, I don't know, but if you look around and think outside the box a little bit, you could end up doing something really interesting.
Great, and I'm sure all our panelists actually can attest to that, because of course we all represent different parts of the sector, and it isn't one straight road in this sector. So keep an open mind and look for opportunities. Right, okay, I'm going to move on again. I've had some fantastic questions here. So we've talked about trees, but I'm also interested in other habitats, and here's one. I'm going to have to put my glasses on for this. Excuse me, people. About other habitats, and in particular, are there any plans for salt marsh restoration or other habitat creation in the vast brownfield areas of the south bank of the Tees? So that's the whole Tees estuary area. Now I'm going to bring in Jeremy here because he sits on the Tees Estuary Partnership, and I know they've been doing a lot, particularly with Inca. So please, over to you, Jeremy.
Yeah, I think one of the real constraints we've got around the Tees estuary is that sort of what you'd call coastal squeeze. The fact that we have development going right down to the river, and we have potential for sea level rise that we were hearing about in one of the presentations earlier. And it is that sort of interface is quite critical, and it's going to be difficult to find space for decent amounts of salt marsh creation, to be honest. And a lot of the industrial reclamation that's been done in the past, particularly on the south side of the river, has involved the dumping of huge amounts of slag and the raising of ground levels. So it's going to be expensive as well. So while the Tees Estuary Partnership is looking at estuary edges projects right along the river, it's going to be tight. One of the pictures I showed in my presentation, I tried to show local pictures for everything. Which meant that the peat bog wasn't a peat bog that I showed, it was the Eston Mire. The salt marsh that I showed was the Old River Tees, so up near Teesside Park, and there's strips of salt marsh there going right up as far as the shopping centre around the back of Teesside Park. So there are opportunities all along the river, but they're not huge.
Fantastic, thank you, Jeremy. And that's a good point to end on. There's opportunities, And it's been a fantastic discussion. We could have, I don't know about you guys, but I could have gone on and asked so many more questions. We've had some great questions here and some fantastic contributions from you as well. So all it leaves me to do is say thank you very much to the panel, and all this is recorded, all the questions will be answered, and we're on the case, but we need your support out there too. It's about people, and we're people-led, so we need your feedback as well as us beavering away too. So thank you very much, everybody. It's I'm glad you've managed to make it to the conference, and I'm going to hand back now to the main conference. Thank you.